Hi, I'm Tim Mosso of the WatchBox at Dubai Watch Week 2021 with a legend in the industry, the man of Chopard and Ferdinand Berthoud, co-president of both, Karl-Friedrich Scheufele. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Very nice to join you and very happy to be here with you today.
So I have to ask, this is the 25th year of Chopard as an integrated manufacturer, a maker of movements. How did it start back in the 1990s?
Well, I'll go back to the founding year of Chopard, which was 1860. And of course, in 1860, Monsieur Chopard started by making his own movements. So many years later, it was in 1963 that my family bought Chopard. Times were different and we did not make our own movements anymore. But back in the 90s, the early 90s, I was convinced that for authenticity reasons especially, it was important to re-engage into movement manufacture. So in 1996, we founded Chopard Manufacture in Fleurier, which was what you would call today a startup. It was, we were 3-4 people, and we started to make our first new own movement. It was called 196, L.U.C 196, and it yielded in a watch collection called L.U.C, Louis Ulysse Chopard, the founder of the company. So we kind of closed the circle and also paid tribute to Louis Ulysse. And basically, that was the beginning of a new era for Chopard in terms of independence, because today we master all the crafts involved with making of movements, starting from the conception, research development, and of course all the production, including the decoration, which is so important. That's what happened in the last 25 years. And we have now 13 base calibers with 65 variations. And we don't stop there.
So now the company's traditional base is Geneva, but you operate extensively out of Fleurier. How large is the Fleurier operation as of 2021?
Well, today the Fleurier operation counts more than 200 employees, and basically we have 2 or even 3 workshops, or even call them factories maybe. One being Chopard Manufacture, where we make all the movements for the L.U.C collection. One being Fleurier Ébauche, where we would make the movements for the rest of the Chopard collections. So this is the more industrial setup, and not least interesting, because what I realized over time is that it is even more difficult to create a more industrial way of producing movements, which is still highly qualitative. Fleurier Ébauche, as I said, it was founded about 10 years ago. And today we produce there about 35,000 movements. And then, last but not least, the very, very small workshop for Berthoud.
Now we'll get to that in a moment, but I do want to ask about something that's not terribly well understood among even sophisticated watch collectors. They understand Poinçon de Genève and the Geneva hallmark. They don't understand Qualité Fleurier. Could you please explain what that is and why it's significant?
Well, Qualité Fleurier was is kind of my brainchild together with Michel Parmigiani. In fact, at around the same time, we were thinking that it would be great to have an integrated certification, whereas to be certified COSC, meaning chronometer certified. But then our idea was to certify the entire watch in its real environment. So we initiated a process whereas a machine would simulate the wearing of a watch for 24 hours on an average day, meaning that someone would be doing sports in the morning, let's say, or in the evening, and then he would go to the office. He would probably work on a computer, so he would not be moving too much. And but he may also close his car door in a very energetic way, and so on. So simulating this one day in the life of, so to speak, really simulates what a watch will go through. And we perfected this, and we called it Qualité Fleurier. And it's probably the most demanding test run for a watch in existence today.
So durability and finish and chronometry all in one.
Yes. And Swiss made, 100%.
Now I do have a question about some of the products of Fleurier à Bosch. You were talking about high quality but more high volume, I suppose you could say, movements. One of those movements goes into each version of the Alpine Eagle, which has probably been the most visible Chopard watch the last 2 years. Could you talk a little bit about the journey from planning the revival of the St. Moritz style to the modern day cadence high frequency?
Yeah, it's a true family story in a way, because when I started working at Chopard in 1979, 1980, the first thing I said to my father at the time was, I think Chopard really needs a sports watch, and preferably a steel watch. And he looked at me like, now what is this all about? We were only making gold watches and only dress watches. So I managed to persuade him, and we engaged in the design of a sports watch, which was subsequently called St. Moritz, because I was very fond of this ski resort. I still do a lot of skiing, and I love the mountains. So St. Moritz was born, and it was a huge success. The first time we showed it at the Basel Fair, we came home and we had orders for over 1,000 pieces. And then we didn't know how to really produce those, because again, we didn't make steel cases, we didn't make steel bracelets, and so we had to learn all of this. And for many years, St. Moritz was a constant part of our collection and very successful. Unfortunately, I would say today, somehow we discontinued this line. And it was my son, funny enough, who is now about the age I was at that time, so he's in his early 20s. He said to me, you know, this St. Moritz watch, it's really cool, and it's an integrated bracelet. It's exactly what I think you need today. You should revive it. And I was skeptical. I totally admit I was skeptical, because after all, I said, we have enough collections, we have a wide range of watches, I don't think we need another line now. But then he turned to my father, and he got some help. Then both of them were working on me and saying, yeah, but it would be great to redesign this St. Moritz. And I said, after all, yes, we have our own movements now. We have a beautiful small automatic movement for the smaller size. We have the very robust, very well-made movement for the 41 millimeter. So after all, that would not be such a bad idea. But I told the two gentlemen, I said, I will take care of the design and I'll consult with you, but I really want to make sure it comes out the way I imagine it, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I must admit. So a few months later, many discussions later, the prototype was on the table, and then the big question arose, yeah, what about the name? Because, well, St. Moritz started off, with a handshake at the time. The municipality of St. Moritz said, oh, great, you make a watch called St. Moritz. A few years later, we had to sign a royalty contract, and obviously the, the contract no longer existed, and St. Moritz had been involved with another brand, which actually is more or less inactive with the name St. Moritz. So I really wanted to stick with a subject that was dear to me, and stick with the mountains in a way. And then I came up with the idea of Alpine Eagle. As you know, we introduced ethical gold, and the Alpine Eagle watch, by the way, the steel version is made of 75% recycled steel. So it's a very special steel we source in Austria, and it's recycled and also melted twice. So it's a very strong material, and it has a very special shine to it. But basically, that's how the Alpine Eagle collection saw the light of day, and yeah, I don't regret it one day.
So now, in the present, you've taken a movement that or at least a technology that you debuted back in 2012, the high-frequency escapement. And now, I think a lot of folks liked the technical concept, but maybe they were waiting for the right case shape, and you combined the Alpine Eagle and the 8 Hertz escapement. Could you talk a little bit about that model this year?
Immediately, as we were working on the first Alpine Eagle pieces, I realized that we had the unique opportunity to introduce some of the movements that we have been making for the L.U.C line in the beginning. And the first one I definitely wanted to introduce was the high frequency. For 2 reasons. I wanted our team to be challenged to produce a few more movements than we had been producing so far, because we're talking about a few hundred. So the L.U.C, the initial 2 series or 3 series, there were only like 50 or 100 pieces each. So it's a very rare watch, in fact.
And that's the high frequency, the original.
That's the high frequency. And therefore, the challenge was, how can we produce a few more movements? We're talking about 250 for the first series of this Alpine Eagle. And so this was one reason. And the other reason, I thought, for a sports watch, elegant sports watch, which the Alpine Eagle is, it's a perfect combination, because the watch will be subject to more wear and tear and more sport activities than a dress watch, obviously. And so it's a perfect environment to put this movement in. Because the unique advantage of this movement is that as it beats faster, the movement will go back to a regular beat faster as well.
When it's disrupted on the wrist.
If there's a disruption by a shock, for example. So this is the great advantage when you talk about high frequency, really.
Now, in terms of the customer experience in the watch business, I think everyone who loves watches dreads service and sending watches back for service. What have you done at Chopard and Ferdinand Berthoud over the last couple of years to try to adjust to modern expectations for service time, communication, that sort of experience?
But again, take the high frequency piece. There is a silicium escapement, and therefore no lubrication needed. And in general, even if lubrication is needed in the more traditional movements, the oil that is used today is much more resistant, or it lasts a lot longer. So by increasing quality in terms of precision of components and so on, you know, we could push the boundaries of service to a much longer time frame.
Longer intervals between
Yes,
service.
longer intervals.
Approximately what's possible now with synthetic lubricants and improved quality production?
I think definitely, you know, 5 years would be normal, but even if you don't service your watch for another 2 years or whatever, you'll be okay.
Are Chopard watches serviceable around the world in regions, or do they all have to go back to Switzerland?
We have a very well-established service network, and we have, for example, in the US, we have a very large service center in Miami, where we service any watch that we produce, except for the minute repeaters.
That's understandable.
Which is understandable.
So now I do have some questions about Ferdinand Berthoud, starting with why you decided that you needed a brand that sat above Louis Chopard. Like Mercedes-Benz created Maybach in the 2000s, and you created Ferdinand Berthoud, but why?
Well, Ferdinand Berthoud was really, how would you call this? It was a decision made entirely out of passion for this watchmaker. It was not a question of marketing, positioning, like where do we position Ferdinand Berthoud versus L.U.C. or any of that. It was really, I have to say, my grandfather and my great-grandfather started collecting watches. And this, it's mainly a pocket watch and a pocket watch collection that I continuously enlarged over the years. And now we have a beautiful small museum in Fleurier, which unfortunately is not open to the public, but upon invitation, where we show what the watch and clock developments over 5 centuries. So we go back quite far, and we obviously, I had to have a section about chronometers, because that's truly my passion. And so in the chronometer section, there had to be a piece from Ferdinand Berthoud. And then I started to get really interested in this watchmaker who, you know, was watchmaker the French king, two French kings and Napoleon. And he was a watchmaker to the French Navy. He was chosen to build all the important ship chronometers in those days. We're talking about 250 years ago. The interesting point was that he was born 15 minutes away from Fleurier, just above in a farmhouse. And his very first years he spent in the region of Fleurier, and then he left for France and basically never came back. He wrote 3,000 pages of literature about watchmaking. There are plans of clocks which are unbelievable. And I started collecting basically everything around Ferdinand Berthoud, including all the books. And at one point I was wondering, well, who actually owns, is there anyone who owns the name? And I came across the person and persuaded him to sell the name to us, not knowing at all what I was going to do.
Now, it's important to note that this young brand, recently restarted, has already won 2 GPHG recognitions in, well, 2016, pardon me, when it was... 3, that's correct.
3.
That's correct. It was 2019, it was the 3rd, right? 3 GPHG recognitions, starting with the FB1, which was the Eagle at the GPHG in 2016, and then the FB2, which was the second model from the brand. I think it won the Chronometry prize?
Yeah, we won 2 chronometry prizes.
Was it the regulator?
And the first one was the Aiguille.
And was it the regulator that won in
2016,
2019?
yes.
That I will love. By the way,
Yes.
if you want an indestructible watch, Ferdinand Berthoud's carburized steel is as good as tegament. If you know Zinn tegament, then you know carburized steel. But doing it on a tourbillon is something entirely different. Where did you get that idea to make an indestructible tourbillon watch?
Well, you see, we're always thinking of the basic idea about Berthoud. The underlying idea that we had is always, what would Berthoud do today if he were to make a wristwatch? Obviously, he never made a wristwatch. He made pocket watches, he made chronometers for ships, of course. And basically, this was the idea, and we said, it's someone who was always interested in chronometry, obviously, and in durability, because these pieces were made for ships, and you can imagine 18th century shipping was not like today. And by the way, the chronometer on the ship was the most expensive piece on the ship other than the ship itself. And so basically, we also think about durability about the case, because the case protects the movement. Reason for which we were looking at this carburized steel, which, by the way, was a very difficult. It was a great idea, but not easy to put in place.
So, what is new for the brand this year?
Well, this year we presented the chronometer in an open shape, basically a almost totally skeletized version, where you can really dive into the movement. You would have everything that we could do without would go away, and it is absolutely stunning, because many collectors remark that, well, from the front the watch is rather closed, and you don't really see much of what you'd like to see, because it's true when you turn it around. And I have a version, a titanium version with sapphire bridges. Then of course the cinema starts in the back, and the front is rather discreet. So in the version we showed this year, you would have a great vision from both sides, and that was extremely well received.
So from small machines to big ones, in the car community, watches are popular. In the watch community, cars are popular. So all watch guys generally like cars. But in the watch world, there are two real car aficionados, people whose reputation precede them, yourself and Richard Mille. Could you tell me a little bit about what car collecting and motorsports and the vintage preservation scene means to you as an enthusiast?
You know, I was passionate about cars when I could actually identify what a car was. I mean, I was really a kid, and I collected all these dinky toys, you know, all these. The only difference is really the price of the cars. But basically, I think vintage cars, and I like the sportier ones even more. For me, they have a flair that no modern car can give you. It's about design, it's about beauty, and it's about performance, but performance in the old-fashioned way.
Yes.
And this combination, and of course handwork. Most of these cars, many of them are handmade. the bodywork is handmade. The engines are built by one person, kind of, you know, and this is something that is reflected in our watches today, still. Nowadays, most cars, unfortunately, are made by robots, as we know, and very soon they won't be making any noise anymore. They already do. So I'm really the kind of the old-fashioned car guy who likes to hear the engine, to smell the cars, and that's why when I first went to the Mille Miglia as a spectator in the early 80s, I said we have to be partnering with this event. It's just unbelievable.
Now I understand that this is sort of an enthusiasm that your father shares, and he actually helped to get you into driving, that you actually drove the Mille Miglia for the first time with your father.
Yeah, I actually learned driving not with a modern car. I drove without a license. I can say that now. Already maybe 2 years, I was 16 in Switzerland, you have to be 18 to drive, but I drove our 1965 Jaguar MK2 3.8, sort of a sporty limousine, very difficult. The steering was so hard, the clutch was hard, the gear change was almost impossible. I learned how to drive on this car. And then everything else was easy, you know. And this really gave me the taste of car collecting. And then I remember when the first 300 SL Roadster arrived in the family, that was a dream my father had from his childhood, to buy this car. And I was the lucky guy I was about 25, I was allowed to drive it, you know, so. And then the Mille Miglia came about, and we actually bought the Gullwing Mercedes to do the Mille Miglia at the time, and what a great time to buy that car, actually.
It's interesting because today cars and watches are almost turning into asset classes, but you do have many passions. You love cars, you love watches and jewelry, but you also love wine. Does the wine and the car connoisseurship inform the design of the watches? I know with the Engine 1, certainly, there's a lot of crossover in the Mille Miglia series.
You know, in 2012, I managed to acquire a wine estate in the southwest of France. Because my dream was not only to sell wine, which I've been doing for many years before, was actually to grow wine myself. And I realized you really have to be even more patient when you're making wine than when you're making watches. But in a way, both professions have similarities, because it's all about patience, precision. You have to be on the job, you have to be precise, and you just have to admit that it takes time. And to develop a movement like the Berthoud movement took us 5 years.
So speaking of the museum, you mentioned it a little bit earlier. This is the 15th year of the L.U.C. that you established.
Yes.
So if folks want to come and visit you in Switzerland and go to the museum, do they call ahead? Do they make reservations? Is it public?
It's not public, but you know, any serious watch collector is most welcome to give us a call, ideally way before, and we can try to arrange it.
Sir, thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Welcome.
Tim Mosso and Karl-Friedrich Scheufele at Dubai Watch Week 2021.